Welcome back to Uncovered. Today, guys, I have a super important topic to discuss. And look, just one that we want to shed a little bit of light on. And today we're going to be talking about mental health and pole. So for those of you who might feel triggered by mental health topics, this might be a good opportunity, if you're not feeling up to it today, just to switch off the podcast and seek help if you have help around. If not, we can pop some stuff in the show notes below. But I personally have been quite impacted by mental health over the last couple of years through a various ways. So I'm really excited to talk about this topic. And today I have Jessica, Polar and PhD candidate, who is a mental health academic, joining me all the way from the UK. Welcome to Uncovered.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm like, I don't know if getting excited about talking about mental health is not a bad thing, because mental health is, as we were discussing before we jumped on, it is a form of health, like physical health, spiritual health. So where I want to start is, what got you so passionate about mental health?
Okay, so I started my career as a teacher of secondary school children, and the topic that I was teaching them predominantly was actually religion.
Interesting.
And yeah, I know, and through the kind of discussions that would happen around those kind of religion things, kind of matters of life and death and philosophy, a lot of kids were coming to me with massive disclosures about traumas that they'd experienced, and like these kids were not even 16 yet, and it just appeared that there was a massive gap in services that I was kind of contributing to by being a teacher because our hands were tied. We weren't able to support them. You have to kind of tick boxes and get them through exams. So that kind of experiential understanding from the mouths of babes really is what triggered my my love of an interest in mental health. I went from there to train as a behavioural therapist for children with conduct disorders.
Yeah, wow.
And I think that in itself is quite an interesting segue, because I think teachers recognise behaviour before they recognise that actually children have mental health difficulties. They see the behaviour as a problem.
Yeah,
so
I guess the behaviour starts the discussion then, doesn't it?
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it's easy to kind of chastise and demonize children who are misbehaving. And it's a lot harder to kind of sit down and try and understand what they're trying to communicate through the behavior. And that's what I learned as a behaviorist, is that actually behavior is a form of communication. And even as adults, we behave in slightly different ways to try and get our needs met. You come home and you open a bottle of wine that says, I'm not coping today. You might go for a drive. These are all little behaviors that we've learned, which are quite what we call adaptive behaviors, but children have got maladaptive coping techniques because they need to be taught how to behave in certain ways. So that's what kind of got me into mental health. And then I guess from there I ended up becoming an academic.
Yeah, and you're currently undergoing a PhD about pole dancing and mental health, or in the early stages?
Absolutely. Yeah, really early stages of that. Yeah.
So first of all, how did you get into pole dancing?
Oh my goodness. Before how long have we got?
It's like so it's morning there. You might need another coffee and I might need a wine. All right, high level.
Okay. I quit the opportunity to be a Disney princess on cruise ships in favor of becoming a teacher. And when that happened, I decided that dancing and singing and musical theatre was basically going to be a hobby for me, which is great because the pressure's off and you can kind of just dip into it whenever you like. So I've always done performance art. And I became really involved in the burlesque and cabaret scene in my kind of late 20s, early 30s. because a friend of mine was doing her master's dissertation in burlesque, which was really awesome.
So cool.
And yeah, so that kind of opened me up to kind of pole and aerial and circus and loads of other amazing things that I'd never considered before, being a musical theatre performer. So I just gave it a go. I was absolutely awful at it, but I absolutely loved it.
We all had a start. We all had a start.
Yeah. It's that whole kind of, the skin is burning. Why am I doing this to myself?
I know. And then you go back after having a break and you're like, why am I still doing this to myself?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, unfortunately, I had to stop doing any kind of high intensity exercise when I got pregnant in 2013.
Yeah.
I had a really high risk pregnancy. And then I became really unwell after I'd had my daughter. So I came back to pole when my daughter was recommended to start doing circus because of her joint hypermobility.
Interesting.
And I know you've done a podcast
we
on
have
hypermobility.
with Simone, the pole physio,
absolutely.
which was an eye-opener for
Absolutely.
me, actually. It started my journey in that.
Amazing.
So, yeah, no, it was great.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess when I started doing that again, alongside my daughter, who at the time was only 6, and isn't it annoying how amazing kids are at pole?
We just did a free trial for a kids class, just for it, because so many people in our community are like, what do you, like, my kid's not 14 yet, when can they start? Sort of like, why don't we just trial a kids class? Oh my God, it's like they're uncoordinated, but great. They're just so strong, they just don't care. I'm just like, took me forever.
Yeah. I mean, within the first day, she was like, "Oh, I can do trapeze. I can climb all the way to the top of the pole." And she
And you're like, "Thanks.
That's fine. That's fine. Off you go." Cirque du Soleil awaits.
Yeah.
So yeah, I started. So I started. It was actually 2019 by the time I went back to it, and then obviously COVID happened.
Yeah.
What a great time to start polling again. So I've had a massive break. And during lockdown, my coach, Jade, at Aerial Sports in Ellesmere Port, she said, why don't you do competitions? It's a really good way of focusing up your attention and giving you a focus for your training. So I did.
Oh.
And I entered a few competitions, and actually I'm doing rather well.
Oh, well done!
Yeah.
How cool!
So thank you. Yeah,
that's awesome.
So yeah, I've got the bug.
Yeah,
definitely.
Oh, I know. It's sort of it's sort of evil, isn't it? Like once you get it, and you're like, I want to put my body through this again. If you train smart, but you can't go wrong, right? So how did the connection?
It's great, and I think.
Sorry, you go. I was going to say, so how the connection?
I was going to say one of those kind of.
Guys, we'll get there. There's always, for a side note, whenever we do these things through the program we use, there always is a slight delay. And to make it weirder or harder, I took my glasses off, so I'm not reading social cues very well. I lost a tooth today to get the start of my braces. It's all happening over here. How did the connection of pole and mental health come together for you?
Okay, so when my daughter was doing her pole for her hypermobility, we saw an improvement with her pain and her symptoms for her hypermobility, which is awesome and very expected. But the other thing that we didn't expect was that there was an improvement with her sensory integration. And sensory integration is like an occupational therapy
so what
term.
is it? Yeah.
And it's about how we process and interpret the world that's around us from a sensory perspective. So we ordinarily think about our sight and our smell and our taste and our hearing, but it goes beyond that. It's about how we feel textures, how we interpret textures, how we place ourselves in the world around us, how we balance, how we spin, we move, how we interpret internal feelings, how we feel full when we've eaten or how we feel hungry, being able to listen to those internal cues and respond to them. So that's kind of in a nutshell what sensory integration is. I'm not an occupational therapist, and I'm sure if you get an occupational therapist on here, they'll be able to talk for a lot longer about it. But yeah, and that's really connected to mental health, because what we know is that children and adults, so children who have developmental trauma, who've experienced neglect or abusive experiences in the early years, the actual structure of their brain changes. And you can see this on MRI scans, much the same as adults who have PTSD, the actual structure of the brain changes. And with children who have developmental trauma, one of the treatments that is used more widely now, certainly in the last 10 years, is the neurosequential model of therapeutics, or NMT. And this was developed by Bruce Perry, who is one of our founding fathers of childhood trauma. And what he looks to do is to treat the area of the brain that has been affected by the trauma. So I don't know, this is obviously going to be a podcast, but if you imagine your hand is outstretched, you put your thumb in the middle of your palm, and that's your amygdala. So that's the very, very first part of your brain that develops in utero. And that is your primitive brain. And that's impulse control, your ability to kind of fight and flight. And then you have over the top, you wrap your fingers, so you're now making a fist. That's your limbic system. So your limbic system is responsible for your relationships and your trust and your attachments with people. So if you imagine if that amygdala underneath your fingers has not developed properly, so we think about children who've been severely neglected, perhaps in orphanages, and that amygdala hasn't actually developed properly because they've cried and they've not been responded to, they've not been fed when they're hungry. Those kind of neurons are not going to switch on. That part of the brain is not going to develop. So when your limbic system, which is the next stage, which develops kind of anywhere up to about the age of 5, when that develops, that doesn't develop properly because it's on rocky foundations. So your attachments, your trust, your sense of safety in the world is already off to a rocky start. So you could be adopted at age 6 months. You've had a horrific 6 months, you've had a horrific pregnancy, be adopted at 6 months and have wonderful, wonderful caregivers, but there's still going to be developmental trauma there because that amygdala hasn't had chance to heal. The final part is, imagine putting another hand over the top of your fist. Now that is your cortex, and that develops right up to the age of 25. So your brain hasn't fully developed until you're 25. And that's responsible for your ability to rationalize and make sense of the world. So if you've ever had trust issues or abusive experiences in your childhood, then the reason why you're having trust issues in your current relationships is basically because neurosequentially, brain structure wise, your entire brain is not developing as it should have done. So going back to the sensory integration, different senses develop at different times. So your olfactory system is one of the first things that develops, which is your sense of smell. And that's kind of a really primitive instinct of like, I can smell fire. The cave is going to burn, or I can smell food, so I'm going to survive. Or I can smell my mother's breast milk, and that's the very first thing that develops. So even your olfactory system can be slightly off if you've had those really early childhood experiences that have not been great. So when we look at neurosequential therapeutics, we look at the developmental history of the child. We look to see at what age those experiences happened, which senses are likely to have been affected in a negative way, and then we treat it using these occupational therapy techniques. Now there's loads of things that are promoted, like yoga, drumming lessons, so really tapping into the vestibular system or tapping into the proprioceptive activities like heavy load bearing, but no one's ever really looked at pole, and purely because of the stigma that's still attached to it around some of its history with strip clubs and what have you, and not actually recognizing that this is a really powerful tool for sensory integration. We spin, we climb, we use all of our senses, and we're totally and utterly in a state of mindfulness when we are poling. You know, you're hanging in crucifix and your mind wanders
you're
somewhere.
not going to be in a safe
you're
place
hit the deck
after that.
Yeah.
So
absolutely,
no,
and you're not going to want to get back up.
It's going to take a while to overcome. So, can you impact your amygdala? Is that how you say it? Amygdala. Thank you. I wrote it down like that, and then I'm like, as soon as you go to say Steph, you get to say it wrong. Can you impact that as an adult?
absolutely. So some of these neurosequential therapeutic methods have
Mm.
been trialed and have been successful with adults who
Mm.
have had childhood trauma and who have PTSD. As with everything that doesn't involve medication, these
Yeah.
things don't get the money for funding. Big pharma have all the money, so
Mm.
you got a new drug, we can trial it. But if anything that involves more kind of holistic and joined up approaches with other sciences, it's a lot harder to get that off the ground. And Bruce Perry's been able to do it with children really successfully, and there is a growing body of evidence there as well that
Okay.
says that this will work with adults. And I have seen it. I mean, I've
Mm.
I've experienced it myself, where I've gone to Pole and I've had stuff with my pregnancy and early parenting, kind of post traumatic kind of symptoms that I believe myself have
Mm.
been impacted by the way that I've been moving in pole. And anecdotally, on my Instagram, I asked for people to kind of share their experiences of how they've been able to process the day-to-day stresses. Is it any better when you come out of pole? Are you able to switch off from it during pole?
Yeah.
And
And
the
I even
evidence is
know,
there.
talking to
It really
girls who
is.
come into the studio, and like I've mentioned before, we're a female or femme identifying studio, and they are like, I'm having a shit day, but I'm here because I know after I do this session, I'm going to be feeling better. So what is it that's then happening in our classes, apart from just the physical exercise, that are making people feel better after they finish a pole class?
Yeah, it's really complex, and we haven't
Mm,
we
that's
haven't
what we need you
researched it
for.
enough yet. So, my research, yeah, my research is coming off the back of
Yeah.
fresh off the back of Joanna Nicholson's research, from Western Australia University, and what she found. I mean, she looked at a number of different things, including the kind of physical effects of pole. But one of the things that she found is that when we haven't
Mm,
researched the mental health side of things enough, there's some psychological things that are going on in there, around kind of group identity and social identity, and that kind of,
mm,
as you say, the femme culture, and maybe even the sort of more stigmatized, ostracized culture. I'm engaging in an activity that's a little bit risque, or it's a little bit frowned upon, and maybe that matches with their narrative of who they think they are because
mm,
of their past experiences. So they're with a collective
mhm,
of kind of misfits almost. And then there's the side of it, which is, you're a very open and welcoming environment full of lots of different body types. So a colleague of mine, from the same university, Emma Poole, she's done a massive piece of research on
yeah.
eating
Oh,
disorders and body
interesting.
image in aerial,
Yeah.
which is fascinating, really fascinating stuff. And what she was hoping is that actually amateur aerialists would be able to be more open and comfortable with their body image, but she actually found the opposite. She found that there's not a lot of difference between professional and
Yeah.
amateur aerialists in the UK, in terms of their kind of feelings about their body when they go into the pole studio. So it isn't just one thing, and I guess what I'm trying to say is it's all of these things combined. But I think there isn't enough research done around
Mm,
the sensory integration side of things, about how we physically move in different ways and how that affects the
mm,
brain. We know how it affects cardiovascular and respiratory wellness. That's been researched extensively. We know that it burns body fat. We know that it builds lean muscle in the upper body, which no other dance style can do. We know that it helps you embody femme, or your own personality, or your own sense of self-identity. But what we don't know is how it repairs any
and
kind
is
of
that
mental
because
health
it's
or brain
probably, well,
trauma.
one, it's not researched, and I guess our sport being so new, in the industry itself being so new,
Mm,
it's, research is only just coming out in the last, I'm going to say like 5 odd years on pole dancing. But is that also because
yeah,
it's hard to quantify
yeah.
from a researching perspective?
It is hard to quantify. Yeah, it is. I mean, we have, with any other type of trauma treatment, which you would traditionally be referred for, whether that's medication or kind of a more psychotherapeutic approach, you would always do something called pre and post measures. So you would kind of do this questionnaire of how impactful is your trauma at the moment? How often does it bother you? How, are you able to switch off from these things? And then after the treatment, you would do this post measure to say, how impactful is it? And if there is a measured improvement, no matter how insignificant, as long as there is some improvement there, then that treatment is considered to be successful. And we do say that people don't engage in PTSD therapies because they are so long and laborious, and they involve addressing narrative an awful lot. So taking you back to that memory and taking you back to that place and being able to process that in a different way. One of the biggest treatments that we have for trauma at the moment is EMDR, which is eye movement, kind of getting your brain to process memories in a better way. They kind of sit in the wrong place in the brain, and by using eye tracking, it places it in the right part of your brain so it can be processed effectively and isn't kind of occurring to you every day. But the EMDR is so laborious. The EMDR takes such a long time and actually requires such a lot from the human being that a lot of people drop out from it. And their other symptoms, their depression or their anxiety symptoms, which are often comorbid, become more of an issue for them than the actual trauma, and that kind of gets left to the wayside. So what Pole has the opportunity to do is to address a range of different mental health difficulties all in one go. So one of the things that myself and Emma Poole are hoping to get off the ground in 2023 is a course for instructors, so that they know what kind of language to use and they know where in their class they can be targeting potential clients who may benefit from working through
what types
some
of things could
whilst they're on the
instructors
pole.
be, like you say language, what are some language things that might be used that could be I'm assuming triggering to people in the room?
Yeah, sure. I think it's not necessarily about avoiding language that's triggering. I think it's more about being mindful of using specific language that will be really helpful. And we use it a lot anyway. Certainly the studios that I've been in, you are strong, you are resilient, using these words that very subconsciously sit in the mind, and the more you hear it, the more you believe it. You've survived that, you fell, you're getting back up, you're resilient, and noticing where you're feeling things in terms of, we were talking before, if you're sitting in a cross-legged release, you've got a pole between your thighs, talking about those body parts, using anatomically correct words. Because a lot of people who've had sexualized trauma, for example, are really quite shameful of like the pelvic girdle and vagina and using words like that. Where are you feeling it? Are you feeling the pressure between your thighs? Are you feeling, bring the pole right up not into your crotch, bring the vagina towards the vagina area, just using actual language to help people feel more comfortable,
making it almost
with relabeling the bodies.
It is normal, but making it almost normal language in and around that environment, especially in a trusting space, and it might help them obviously build their trust and build their confidence in being able to relabel their own vagina.
Absolutely.
Interesting. I know I use the word vagina quite a lot when explaining moves, only because when I say it, it catches people's attention. And I'm like, and you're going to get your vagina here. It's like, oh, did she just say vagina? But I didn't think I was going to say vagina this much on this podcast. But trigger warning, lots of vagina chat.
Trigger warning.
But yeah, I know I've been doing that, but I've never thought about it in that sense. We've definitely had discussions about, don't say things like, oh, somebody's going to stick their finger up your bum, or I know that's a really bizarre thing, but it's a discussion as instructors that we've had to have to be like, you can't say things, or you need to be mindful of when saying those things because it could be triggering for somebody else.
Absolutely. I mean, I think as instructors, you have to appreciate, just through no fault of your own, you've created this really healing space the research says that everyone who does pole feels like they're part of a community, a very small kind of studio community, and then on a much wider scale, this larger community. And to get that, what we call therapeutic alliance, that can take months as a therapist. You're just popping in every week, seeing your therapist. To get to that place where you're able to then either transform or to heal takes a really, really long time in therapy. So you have already got a therapeutic space, and we should really be using the
And I think like when you go to therapy too, it's not always a fun time. Like, even though it's good for you and it's great. I mean, I still hold monthly appointments purely because I know that they're good for me. But sometimes I'm like, I don't know what I'm walking into. And then I come out and be like, I really wish I didn't go today. I know it'll be good in the long run, but I need to, it was really emotional and I need to process this. So yeah, it's way more fun than therapy.
Yeah. Absolutely. And the research of Joanna Nicholson, she said one of the things that keeps pole dancers keeping going to pole is the fact that it's fun. And one of the main drivers is that you are achieving something. You come out of that session and you've always achieved something. And it's so much more difficult when you're in a face-to-face psychotherapy appointment to actually see that benefit and that bonus and come away going, yes, I'm winning at mental health today.
And now my mascara is all down my face and I have to reset my entire makeup and I'm feeling really on top of the world.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I'm going to go to
the amount of times I've left therapy and gone straight to pole. Mostly before I brought the studio, because then it became my workplace predominantly. Predominantly pretty much my workplace. But yeah, like the amount of times I was like going to pole, I used to have, when I first started therapy, I would go every single Friday night at 5 p.m. because that's what you want to do on a Friday night. But I was committed to making change and I'd go straight from there to the studio. And it was always...
And that's interesting as well, Steph, because what you're saying there is that you were committed to a change, and what we call that is on your cycle of motivation for change, you wanted that change, and that time of day on that day of the week suited you and fit in with you. How often can we get therapy appointments?
Well, it didn't actually fit me, but I was like, I was just like, well, if this is the only appointment I can get, and I knew like I needed change, like I knew in myself I needed change. So I was like, if this is the only appointment I can get, I'm going to go because I need this to happen. But no, you can't. You have to work around their schedule, and then they just get busier and busier. Pole studios are always open.
Absolutely. And I wonder, absolutely. And I wonder as well, that sense of connection that you have with a therapist, did it ever feel as connected as you did with your peers in your pole dancing studio or even with your instructor?
It's not the same.
Any difference there?
I know, like, over time, and I mean, I've been in therapy now for 6 years. So over time, you build and it's a safe place. And I've obviously got a relationship with him and where I know I'm going to go and we're going to work on me in that time. And I can say anything I want and I won't be judged. I won't be shamed. I still don't feel like I'm very open. So a lot of the people which I'm around and I work with in the studio know some of the experiences that I've had. And it's become a safe place, but I had to work to get that, I guess. So does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm.
Now I feel like I'm being interviewed. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. I should be
I'm not used to being on this end of the questions. I know.
This is literally what happens when you interview a therapist.
I was like, she's a therapist, that's for sure. But I do know that there's so many of our girls who come in. And I'm sure it's not just our studio. I'm sure it's plenty that are like, we spend money on pole because it's cheaper than therapy. And it makes me feel good. So I think, like, they say that and you understand what they're saying. You really do get it. But how to communicate that outside of people who don't do pole and they're just like, you guys do what? They're like, especially with the stigma associated.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think the more I discuss my daughter's participation in pole, the more acceptable it is when I say she does aerial or she does circus. And then I kind of mention, oh, she does pole as
Yeah.
part of that wider gambit of activity. And, oh, okay, that's interesting. And then I have to take them back to kind of several
Isn't
thousands
it
of years ago when they used to do
funny?
it in
Yeah.
India and China, and then it's all okay. But
Oh yeah,
there's
and the last
still this
episode
big
that
piece
we
of work to
released,
do, isn't there, on the
just this
stigma?
week was pole stripping versus pole, and that was just talking about exactly that, like the stigma that's associated around it. Why is there a divide between the two? And yeah, parts of what we do come from strip clubs. And I think the world is becoming more accepting, but there's still what I like to term grey hair. Like there's still a lot of grey hair in and around that. So I feel like we're making waves there slowly, but still even educating within our own communities is really important to continue to do. So what are you hoping to do with your research?
So the first stage for me is about this kind of educating the instructors and getting them to use their skills to their full potential, and raise awareness as well of maybe the types of mental health that might be presenting in their studios, and how to support that to get the most out of their students and to get the most out of their
And I
student
find
experience, but to keep it a safe
and I find as
space
an
as well.
instructor, it's
And I think that's important.
I find a really important skill as an instructor is emotional intelligence, and being able to, one, control your own and like work within yourself when you're talking to somebody, but to be able to identify something in somebody else. And this is where being an instructor is so much more than just teaching pole. And when people want to be instructors going, oh, I just want to be an instructor. Being a pole instructor, I get to pole all the time. But there's so many other elements of which we work with as instructors. And this is one of them. It is disclosures as well. Like we do get people come to us and share trauma about themselves, about things in their life. And we're going to be getting our local domestic and family violence not-for-profit in to speak to the instructors, because we don't know what it is we should be doing. And this could potentially be the same with mental health. Like as instructors, how do you approach somebody who might give you a big disclosure, or somebody who might be presenting something? But yeah, it's challenging.
Absolutely. And eating disorders and body dysmorphia as well is a huge issue, and they go hand in hand with trauma as well. And I think there has been an emphasis on kind of athleticism and shredding and competition prep, and you've got to get your body ready for photo shoots, and how much of that is being legitimized for people who are suffering with eating disorders, kind of using that as kind of a smokescreen to kind of perpetuate their eating problems or their body dysmorphia. You know, massive, isn't it?
And that just starts a new podcast series.
Podcast. Yeah.
But and one thing I learned recently, which I didn't know, is particular exercises for people with eating disorders or who are recovering, who were, so focused on a particular body image. If they may have done those exercises 100 times to punish themselves. So including them in the warm-ups might be triggering for them.
Yeah. Triggering, absolutely. And you think about the body mass and the bone density of recovering eating disorder clients. Are they actually safe to return to physical exercise such as pole? And the answer is probably no. And you've got to be very careful about how you monitor and you manage that physical exercise as well. And nutrition. Number of conversations I've had to shut down around food. And that's a particular bugbear of mine. I think because I've worked on wards with eating disorder clients, I think conversations around food and nutrition.
And I think this
just
just
shut them
shows
down
like
as quickly as I possibly can.
The complexity of the world, for one. I think that's really important to highlight. But the complexity of a pole studio space and just bringing together, and it would be in any community, but bringing together that many people. And like, I was just, one of the thoughts that were just running through my head as we're having this conversation is, you know, as instructors, we need to be better understanding the tricks, but then we also need to be able to read the room. And then you want to, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but then we got to add in this additional element about mental health. And then like it is layering and layering upon, but I'm assuming as a teacher, you would have had the same juggle.
Absolutely. It's as you said, it's
connections built with them, and you feel for them, and you have that connection with them, and you want them to succeed.
Yeah. And it becomes very difficult to find where your professional boundaries are as a teacher. As a therapist, it's slightly different than it is as a teacher, but then as an instructor, again, it's different. So being able to understand your kind of therapeutic boundaries, your professional boundaries, how much input do you need to have in that person's process, and how much do you need to kind of signpost them on? I mean, is it your ethical obligation to signpost somebody and say, look, I've noticed you've lost an awful lot of weight. I'm concerned. I don't want you to do the conditioning today or the warm up. I don't think you're safe to do that. Or do you just pass it all back to the client and say, well, you know, they're paying me the money and they've signed the park queue, so I'm just going to let them do it.
That's a really good question. And I'm just thinking about the instructors in my studio, and I know they're not going to do that. Okay, you've paid the money. Let's just move on. They're going to be like, okay, I care for you. I want you to get X, Y, Z out of this today, but you can't do this. And I know that because I've literally had instructors be like, I don't think you should be here today. I think you should go home because safety was a concern. So yeah, but I guess the boundaries for that would be different in every country is my assumption.
Yes, I believe so. And I think it's down to your personal indemnity insurance and your public liability insurance, what that says as well.
That's not surprising.
And as far as I'm aware, there's nothing about mental health
it's also
in any of those things.
Right? It's like kind that as a thing. Are you seeing improvements in that?
Yeah.
Around mental health?
In terms of stigma? I think now that we're starting to realize that there is an economic value in making people mentally well, and that there's financial implications if people are left to go into mental health crisis. It's become one of the WHO's kind of global developmental goals, and improving mental health and well-being is on there, and all of the money is going into either end of services. It's either going into early intervention, and when we talk about early intervention, it's on kind of universal services. It's kind of your instructors, it's your teachers, it's your person on the street understanding what mental health is and being able to signpost somebody when they need it before they hit crisis. And then the rest of the money is going into kind of crisis management. And that then frees up the core services to be able to operate to their full capacity, because in the UK especially, they're absolutely stretched to the max. And we're looking at waiting times of kind of 18 months from kind of assessment.
Huge. And I know here, like even EMDR. In Australia, getting into a psychologist at the moment is a huge wait. They're on waiting lists for 6 or so months. And I've had those conversations with students. You keep bringing up signposting. What does this mean? Like when you signpost a person?
So signposting, so and that would be if somebody, for example, you notice that they've got some of the signs of an eating disorder. So my chihuahua is knocking my computer. And it's making me look like I'm having an earthquake.
Did you see? I had a little poodle up here before going like, give me attention.
So signposting. I did. I noticed a little head, but he looks well behaved. This chihuahua is going to be the death of me, I'm sure. Okay, so signposting is, if you notice, for example, somebody has got the signs of an eating disorder, that you might be able to just have a little leaflet ready to go in the studio. Maybe it's just precariously placed in a rack of leaflets, and you might be able to just whip that out, or having posters with mental health helplines on so that people can access that support themselves without you having to kind of single people out. It could be having your own kind of clinical supervisor on the phone ready to go. So as a studio owner, you might want to, access the services of a psychologist or of a psychiatrist and say, look, am I doing a good job here? Is there anybody I should be concerned about? And that's basically what signposting is. And the purpose of signposting from an early intervention point of view is that it empowers the person to get the support themselves, rather than waiting for that help to come at crisis point. Because a lot of people with mental health issues have struggled for so long with their mental health that they lose track of what those early warning signs are, and when they're kind of straying away from their normal. And being able to actually say,
and I feel like we talked about this before.
It's not until they're actually in crisis
the record
that they
button,
actually
but
come
I
forward.
feel like they're normal. You just mentioned there. I feel like that's really important to share, because it is about your normal. It's not necessarily about how you compare to somebody else, because coming all the way back to what you were talking about right at the beginning, and your childhood traumas or experiences set up, I call them schemas. I've been set up your schemas or your behaviors as adults. So everybody's are different. So you can't, I guess, compare how you're going and how shitty your day is to somebody else's, because their triggers in life or their situations might be really different. So I think what's really important to share there is that it's your normal, and mental health is health. And it is, I know in my own journey, it's been up, down, round and round. It's just been a lot. And then when you think you're getting good with one thing, something else happens. So, and that's okay, because I had the support there to help me. So I was able to just pick up quite quickly. But yeah, I think that's really an important message, probably a huge takeaway from this.
But isn't that the same with your physical health as well? Because, you have ups and downs with your physical health. I've had coronavirus 3 times since October, and, had to sit back and not do physical exercise and then get back into it. And you need to know when to rest. You need to know when it's okay to push yourself. You need to understand when you need to take on more calories because you're competing for a competition and you're doing comp training. You need to know that because you've got an old injury on your piriformis, that you need to go and see a sports masseuse every now and again to work on that fascia and that tear. You need to know that your flex isn't as good as your I don't know, something else. So don't go pushing yourself in the flex lesson. Just because you've got a bendy Wendy in the class 100. Doesn't mean that you have to be that bendy Wendy as well. And it's exactly the same with mental health. We're so good at understanding physical differences and listening to our physical health, because that has been forced down our throats since birth. You've got to go to the doctors, you've got to have your immunizations, you've got to do this, you've got to do
that. And I remember when I first started therapy,
normalized that
the analogy was given to me is, he's like, you're just going to the gym, but for your brain. I'm like, okay. Yeah, and it does, it is so true. I'm just doing my exercises to work that muscle that controls the rest of me. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. We just can't see our brain, but what's really interesting is we can see the behaviors that come out of our brain. So that they're our warning. So it's understanding what our normal behaviors are, and then understanding when they're not right.
Absolutely. And it's recognizing that our normal behavior, which might appear normal to us, when it's perceived by other people, actually isn't normal, or isn't correct, or isn't what we think is normal and safe behavior for us, until it's pointed out by somebody else, actually perhaps isn't a safe behavior to engage in. So it might have worked really, really well for us as a coping strategy throughout our lives, and it's never really caused any alarm or harm to anybody, but you've never really shared it. And then when you do share that information, somebody comes back to you and says, actually, yeah, you shouldn't be drinking 3 bottles of wine on a weekend because you've not been able to cope with the stress during the week. Oh, is that not normal? Oh, okay. Well, that's historically what everybody in my family has done for the last 3
So if
generations.
you
Why is
do
that
see
not normal?
somebody
And then
in
you
a
can start to unpick
studio
some of that.
with some abnormal signs, how can you, I know we talked about approaching and getting a leaflet, but what are some words that you can use to obviously, I want to say not upset them, but I don't know that that's a really good word to use.
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? Because you're against the clock as an instructor. And I always say, don't ask how somebody's coping unless you've got time to hear how they're not. And I've had to do this in actual classes with students where I've said, I can see you struggling. Do you mind if I speak to you after the class, or can I catch up with you later? And this then starts to eat into your time, into your studio time. But it's about acknowledging, I can see you're struggling, or I've got concerns about how you're coping, and then being able to ask them to come back to you when is an appropriate time. Because the worst thing you can do is to say to somebody, I can see you're not coping, or how are you coping today? And then that's the whole class gone out the window, and there's a massive overshare, and then it bleeds into everybody else, and then you're triggering everybody else because there's this big disclosure that you didn't want to happen. And then conversely, you don't want to be kind of glossing over it of like, oh, you've got this, you're okay.
Isn't it?
It's like, oh, I'm really not okay.
And
I need
if there is a person in class who notices this about themselves, what are some things they can do for themselves?
Crikey, there's so many things available online. I'm going to sound really cheesy now, but lockdown has kind of made kind of cyber therapy a thing.
Yeah, I would love
of websites.
to. Yes.
We can add those to the kind of thread on the podcast so that people can access them. Yeah, I mean, in Australia, you've got so many good resources. Canada's got some really great resources, and you've always historically done cyber therapeutics really, really well because you're such a huge country. And being able to access a range of services has been tricky because you've got so many remote parts. The UK is just kind of catching up with that now, and you know, we've all got laptops in the NHS, which is great. We haven't had like our own technology for
that would be
years,
amazing.
so we're finally catching up with the rest of the world. But yeah, we can put some online resources on there. But I think one of the most brilliant skills that you can teach yourself is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, which is a grounding technique. For anyone who's feeling overly anxious or is becoming overwhelmed with any sort of emotions or distressing thoughts. So if they're being triggered in class, or if they're just becoming very overwhelmed, maybe you're just getting yourself in a real tears about not being able to do a particular move, and that's kind of conjuring up a lot of overwhelming feelings for you.
Don't do this upside down.
Obviously, if you're in a pose, you need to come down off the pole. I'm not asking you to do this whilst you're in a Aisha. Yeah, no, we don't want you doing 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 in Aisha. Just come down to the ground. And we do stop and label 5 things that you can see in the room. So for me right now, if you notice my language, it's really descriptive. I'm looking at my handbag and it's pink, and it's got a big zip on it, and it's got a black handle. So I'm being really descriptive about what I can see. So that's one thing. You can say this in your head. You don't have to say it out loud. I'm looking at a white radiator on the wall, and it needs a bit of a clean. I can see a little mucky handprint on there from my daughter, etc. So you go up to 5, and then 4 things that you can touch. So in the posture, I'm touching a chrome pole, and it feels cold, and it feels smooth. And it feels warm, or it feels sticky. I can feel my eye tack on it. Yeah. Another thing that I can touch the mat, and the mat feels squishy and it feels cold. It might feel soothing. And then 3 things that you can hear in the room. So I can hear traffic passing outside on the road, or I can hear the clock ticking on the wall. 2 things that you can smell. I don't know. What can you smell in a pole? Let's not go there. I can smell the vodka in the bottle. Yeah. And then 1 minute of deep circular breathing. So we breathe in through our nose to a count of 4, and we breathe out through our mouth to a count of 8. And we do that for 1 minute and just check the clock. And that's what we call grounding. It brings you back into the present. And again, it's a form of sensory integration, because you are integrating all of your senses, because what we do is we go straight back to our amygdala when we're in crisis, and we're unable to rationalize, we're unable to place ourselves in the space. And particularly with PTSD sufferers, we take ourselves back to that traumatic event.
No, I think, thank you for sharing
very
that.
real
I think that'll be
and
so
very
helpful
disabling
for so many people who maybe do need a coping skill in a moment where, like you just said, if something comes up for you in class and you weren't expecting it, you might need something to bring you back in. But also probably a helpful skill if you can see somebody is not, and be like, okay, I just want you to label, tell me 5 things you see, and start working through that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you've got a client who is in a crumpled heap on the floor and is bawling their eyes out, or just seems just totally overwhelmed, and perhaps you're thinking, this could be something a bit more, but they're saying it's just because I'm really frustrated with my day and I've not been able to get that move. I've hurt my arse falling off the pole. You can do that with them. That's something really simple that you can do just to bring them back into the present. One thing my yoga instructor used to do was she had affirmation cards, and you can get some really, really cute ones on like Etsy and even Amazon, and just handing out after your cool down, just popping down a little affirmation card on everybody's cool down mat, and just saying that's your affirmation for the day.
Write that down.
Just changing some
cards
of that
in the studio. The girls are going to be like, oh, Steph's got a new bloody idea.
Take it one.
Yeah.
Take it one step further, and you could ask people to set an intention.
So before we wrap up,
practice
is there, I know quite a lot really yoga. Quickly. Is there anything else you want to share about pole and like, it's okay if it goes for a while, but like about pole and mental health? Like, is there anything you really, really want to share?
No, I just think that if you're getting something from your pole, and you do view it as your therapy, keep using that language. It's really important that you attribute your physical activity to a form of therapy, because it absolutely is. And I promise you that if I don't do this research, somebody will, and in 10 years' time you'll be like, yeah, I was doing that. I was self-medicating with pole. And I want to hear from people as well. So I'll send you the link for my Insta and my website, and you can get in contact with me, because I want to hear your stories. And if you want to be part of my research as well, I'll be looking for participants.
I jumped on
as well.
And I answered some. What was your feedback like for that? Oh, yeah, they were great questions.
Let me get that up for you now. It was interesting. Yeah. Thank you. It's just a kind of a little taster of some of the things that I will be trying to address through my research. So nobody said that their mind actually wanders during pole, which is really interesting, because actually with PTSD, if we have intrusive thoughts, it's very difficult to switch off from that. Or if we have OCD, for example, it's very difficult to switch off from those intrusive thoughts. And people who have trauma, OCD, and other mental health difficulties that involve intrusive thoughts, when they're in the gym, for example, they find it very difficult to switch off. When they're going for a run, possibly their mind will wander. But actually in pole dancing, what we're finding is people are going in and it's them in the pole. If the mind wanders, it's very difficult to kind of think about that thought for too long before you back in the room again. So that was really interesting. They're either rock solid on me and the pole, or they can bring their focus back really quickly, which I thought was fascinating. The other question that I asked is whether or not mental well-being has actually improved, and 100% of everybody who answered
so amazing,
said that the mental health and well-being has improved since starting
like, you
pole,
know, obviously
is amazing,
that exercise is good for people, but why is it like, and what is it in pole that is doing that? And there's obviously a lot to think about when you're on the pole, so it probably is really hard to wonder, but interesting.
Really interesting. And then in comparison to other exercise that they've tried as well, pole has had an impact. So not just what is it about physical exercise, because we know that obviously endorphins and other happy hormones play a part in rewarding the brain when you partake in exercise. And that's why we encourage people as mental health therapists to go and engage in physical activity. We need that for the brain. We feed the brain with those endorphins. But in comparison to other exercises, and we know that pole dancers have tried other exercises, either tried and failed at other exercises or are really physically active in other things. But there's something unique about the pole that is making them improve their mental well-being. So that's just, I just find that really fascinating. And everyone agrees as well that stuff on their mind before class has been processed in a different way. So either it's still there after the class, and that they're kind of glad of that rest, so they've been able to process it, or it's significantly less, or it's easier to process.
Like, I mean, I'm a reflector,
class.
so I know I need the time to think about things. But yeah, what is it that makes you feel better about it at the end of it, or okay to interest? Can you please do your research? I want all the answers.
Yes. And I guess the last one, the last question that I asked was about what pole has enabled you to do, and the majority of people said it's helped them work through some shit.
Like what? Like
which
mental
is really
health
interesting. I want to know what shit you're working through when you're in pole. What shit is that? Yeah. What is it? Is it body image stuff? Is it, as you say, is it schema and that narrative that you've been fed? Is it stress of the day?
Well, yeah, guys, if you want to be a part of this, I think you should hit up Jess. What's your Instagram handle, Jess? Okay.
Oh, my Instagram. It's a very long story about why my Instagram handle is what it is. It's China White Pole. China White was my burlesque alter ego.
Fair enough. So China White
I'm
is
really pale.
The paleness.
China White.
Oh, yeah. And like the off-white top I'm wearing, or the white
foundation
on
my skin this morning, but I'm usually the colour of your top. So.
I'm wearing a very white top today, guys. Okay,
yeah. So yeah, China White Pole.
Yeah.
And I will pop my I've got a blog that I'm starting up purely for the purposes of the research, so I'll pop the link onto my Insta for that as well.
I love
just
it.
Come forward
thank you
so
much for joining us today and uncovering mental health. I feel like we only really scratched the surface here, but there's only so much you can do in a podcast episode, but I think it's a great start. And yeah, I really hope that we get to see this. Like you said, if you don't do it, somebody else will, because I think there are people who are super interested in it. And the more we are accepting mental health and the more we're accepting pole, the more this is going to come together.
Absolutely.
Guys, if you love this episode, please leave us a review. Go check out Jessica's Instagram page. And feel free to ask questions. We'll be talking about mental health all week on Instagram. So share in our Tell Us sections. And yeah, until next time, we'll see you all soon.